Today we're going to move eastern along our little civilization zones that we have talked about in earlier slides to the Indus River Valley civilizations. These will fall right along with the normal time frame as the Egyptian and Mesopotamian regions, and then later on China when we get to there. So let's go ahead and talk about 1.3 and how 1.3 key concept information pertains to the Indus River Valley. Now, with the first states emerging here, you have to look at the core zone, look at the central location. Modern day, you're looking at an area of Pakistan, right along the border between Pakistan and India, along the Indus River. Now, the Indus River, being centrally located, has another built-in advantage that other zones and core civilization regions don't have. The Indus River actually floods twice a year, so as you can probably imagine, this is a added bonus for the people that are going to be settling along this river valley, because now they have 2 floods a year, which equals 2 crop cycles a year. And the central location will also let this region prosper in other aspects of cultural diffusion and economics. We know, for example, for a fact through records and archaeology that this region traded with both China and Mesopotamia through seals that they have been found and trade records and stuff like that, just the actual goods themselves. There's a larger scale map there to the bottom right corner. But for the most part, once again, you're thinking about Pakistan, that modern day area along the Indus River. Now, 1.32a, once again, you've seen this already, so we're going to read through it real quick. States are powerful, and they have new systems of rule that are going to help mobilize surplus labor and resources over large areas. Remember that from our earlier PowerPoint discussions. Now, rulers often have a source of power believed to be divine or have some kind of divine support and or are supported by a strong military. So in this case, we're going to look at 2 major cities here that developed in the Indus River Valley, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Right around 3000 to 1500 BC is the typically widely accepted time frame here as far as the ebbing and the flowing of these 2 major cities. But these are very well planned cities. Talking about public works, right? Urban planning. That was one of your portions that we talked about before. These cities show a definitive standardization of labor and public works. For example, really cool, they're built on multiple story houses. Unlike other places that only have 1-story houses, maybe 2, we were seeing 3 and in some cases 4 stories or more buildings within these cities, and they actually had plumbing. They could flush waste out of these buildings into other areas through irrigation and all that kind of stuff. That shows a lot of organization and a lot of planning. Those things are not available in most of your other core civilization zones that we've studied so far. The trash systems there are second to none. Your video talks about that as well, that John Green goes over. They're definitely a farming-based economy, as you can probably imagine that most of these core zones are, especially at first. That's why these people come together. They collect. They look at the flooding along this river. They know they can grow stuff on it, so they can have more population. There is control of this farming throughout the city. So we're going to get to politics here in a minute, but that definitely will lead to some kind of organization there. And then once again, trade. I put Mesopotamia down, but they're definitely trading with China as well. They lack some of the finer goods that other areas have. You were looking at Mesopotamia last lecture, and we talked about how different groups in that region had iron weaponry and stuff like that. Arrowheads that were metal tipped and whatnot. The Indus River Valley, they don't have some of that access. So we know that trade took place because they wanted to get their hands on some of the more quote unquote finer goods that they don't have access to. Breaking down 1.32a again, we're going to now take it and kind of split it up a little bit, chunk it. Looking at surplus labor and resources, economics definitely will come out of that. Access to metals are there. This whole region has access to certain metals, but not to other types of metals. And so they do have some goods and luxury items. Once again, I'll give you the example. They have found stone arrowheads, and they don't have swords in this early Indus River Valley civilization zone that can be verified. So that's kind of a lacking thing for them. Some of the ornate objects you see in the right picture there were done through other base metals or through trade. They got their hands on iron and stuff like that through their neighbors. Technology will be another continuation of this. Once again, urban planning under 1.3.3.a. You have to look at urban planning and what's being done to make these cities developed. We know that technology is a big part of that. Irrigation along the river valley is eventually expanded, as it is done in most of the other regions that we have studied. They have to spread out the water because although the river is flooding twice a year, you still have to account for eventual population growth that needs to, increase farming output. The potter's wheel, because we know they have finer goods they're trading, they're doing pottery on their own as well. Kiln baked bricks, which is something that was really cool that is seen in this region that is very good and unique. They actually had a process developed for baking bricks that allowed them to build upward instead of just outward like we saw in most of the other zones. They do have a writing system that is seen with some of these technologies, but this one is only been recently decipherable. So although we have records of a Rosetta Stone that helped us do hieroglyphics in Egypt, and we have epics and books that are written in Mesopotamia like the Epic of Gilgamesh and all that kind of stuff, writing here has only recently become discernible and decipherable. So that's going to make some of these discoveries pretty interesting for us as modern day historians and learners, because we're just now opening some of those doors to stuff. And technology-wise, once again, once you start adding horses and camels and stuff like that, along with roads that are being constructed, you have, once again, the development of what will be known as the Silk Road. This will be the middle zone of that Silk Road as it travels. And once again, we know through records like seals and soapstone objects that have been found and metals that have been traded that were not local to the region, that there is extensive trade networks happening even during this first time period several thousand years ago. The East and the West are starting to be unified through the Indus River Valley zone, this middle way. Looking at politics as we move on, the name and the most basic way to talk about this is very complex, very centralized. It's so complex that there's actually two different theories about this whole entire Indus River Valley. We know there's two major cities, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, for example. So there's a single state theory that, given the proximity of artifacts and how similar they are between different cities in this area, and evidence of planned settlements and urban planning that takes a lot of organization and communication, raw materials, settlements near there, we think that there might have been a single state that is just spread out with its administration. Or some people have theorized that there's actually a city-state theory going on here, just like we saw or we will see with other areas like Greece, for example, down the road, that there are actually not one single ruler, but there are several. For example, Mohenjo-daro had a separate ruler and Harappa had one, and so forth. So that has gotten some steam here lately when it comes to being spread out so far. Now, either way, we know that centralization is occurring. The easiest way to personify this and exemplify this is the evidence of large granaries that have been found near the city centers. When you have a storage system of food that is located near the center of a city, that indicates that there is organization going on and manipulation of stuff like transportation and labor and record keeping. So all of those things are hallmarks of a centralized government. So whether it's complex on a single state theory scale, a city-state theory scale, there is still centralization going on within a city due to such evidence as the evidence of granaries being built. Continuing on, we're going to look at 1.3.3, culture, playing a significant role in unifying states. Once again, the major umbrella of culture can incorporate things like laws, language, literature, religion, myths, and art. and even more. And so, religiously speaking, definitely polytheistic in the Indus River Valley. There's evidence, like for example, the seal below of a man with horns, and that's the primary god, and he kind of dictates certain things. And then, of course, on the flip side of that, man would be nothing without women. There's several known fertility goddesses that we have evidence of throughout this river valley. Many of these different iconic religious symbols and people and goddesses and gods and all that kind of stuff will eventually lead to the Vedic religion that is going to develop in this region moving forward into the next time period. So keep your eye on that as we start to see more organization of religion and polytheistic religion at that. Socially speaking, very complex structures. When you start making your little breakdown of Venn diagrams or charts or whatever you're going to do to be studying for this class, you've got to look at the different structures here of these core civilization zones. And you should be able to draw or write or whatever you're going to do, little charts that show what these little pyramids look like between these different zones. Egypt looks different than Mesopotamia. It looks slightly different than the Indus River Valley. It will look slightly different when we get to China and Mesoamerica and so forth. So for this one, for Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and other Indus River Valley cities, we know it's complex. We know that priests typically have a higher status. They're kind of like intermediates, right? Kind of like we saw with a little bit of the Egyptian way, where the pharaoh is a god, a living god. Well, now we have priests assuming control, king/priests. This is the beginning of what a term that you will need to know about, theocracies. So make sure you write down theocracy, religion being heavily intertwined with the way politics are set up and run. Religion and politics connected. That's a theocracy. That's what we're seeing here in these Indus River Valley regions. These gods and goddesses have to be addressed and appeased. We know there's strong social class separation below the priest class. The easiest evidence we have of this is all these homes that are being built in these cities that we've unearthed and looked at over time. They show different sizes. Definitive sizing of homes is an indication that there are wealthy people and there are poor people. Just like today, you can go to a mansion along the river or in certain areas of Mandarin or wherever you're at and see the definitive difference between somebody who lives in that house versus somebody who lives in an apartment or a small, home or whatever. That it indicates that there is a strong social class separation, which is really cool to look at because social class separation will be something that you have to look at with social context throughout the entire course of this year. The sooner you start looking at social class separation, the better off you're going to be for things like essays and large-scale themes. And then, of course, women. Keep an eye on women always, if you can. Women in this case have more reverence than we would give credit for normally because of the fact that we know there's fertility goddesses there. Women are going to play heavily in being revered for their production and function as providers of children. Certain cultures that we will study down the road put a very high premium on women because women create sons and daughters, mainly sons, and those sons are therefore used to be, leaders and warriors and all that kind of stuff. That was the case in all the zones we've studied so far and we will study, but they have more reverence here, particularly for function and reproduction, and we know that through evidence of, idols and pottery and things that were created that show women in a very positive manner, or not a very positive manner, but at least a more positive manner. And actually, this is going to be a quick wrap-up today because most of this stuff kind of carries over. But the early civilization here will end with several things, actually. Records, because they're just now becoming decipherable. We have a little bit of a ambiguous type of question as to what is going to cause the decline of the Indus River Valley civilizations. If Harappa and Mohenjo-daro and other cities are so well planned and so centrally governed and culturally united and all that kind of stuff, and they're trading right with their neighbors to the east and west, then what's going wrong? Well, there are several things that lead to the initial decline of these early civilization areas. The easiest one is probably natural disasters, whether it be storms, stuff like that, earthquakes, whatever. Natural disasters could cause problems. Ecological problems, for example, shifting of rivers, drying out of riverbeds. That makes irrigation extremely hard. Harsher winters, harsher summers, and that kind of stuff. The same basic thing that we struggle with in the world today when it comes to ecological changes. If you're cutting down, deep land and trying to move it around in order to make more homes, that can cause problems down the road. So over hundreds of years, that stuff might have caused an end to some of these early city zones. You also have lower food yields. Sometimes those issues cause a issue with long-term grain production. And then without grain, less food. Less food means that people are going hungry, starving, all that kind of stuff. That leads to anger and possible war and chaos and all that kind of stuff that we've already talked about. We know for a definitive fact that eventually one of the main offshoot rivers off the Indus River, the Hakra River, does in fact dry up. So we know that some of this stuff is definitely founded in fact, where some of the main tributary rivers that go off of the Indus River that were used for irrigation do undergo shifting and changing and that kind of stuff. And that will present problems for a lot of different areas through obvious, thinking. And then finally, another definitive known fact that we know about are that nomads will play a role here in the destruction, so to speak, of the early civilization in the Indus River Valley. The Aryan nomads from the north are going to move through looking for more cattle, looking for more growth land, looking for more this and that. Nomads move around until they find something they like and they use it and they move around ever still. The Aryans from the north are going to move into this region and eventually put a lot of stresses on some of these city zones that are already under stress because of other issues. So with that, you've got a switchover or a takeover here by the Aryans in many of these places, and then eventually this will lead to some of our empires down the road that are going to try to maintain power and authority. So with that, continuing to review 1.3, I would simply use this in conjunction with your Shang China and Mesoamerica things to start developing a chart or Venn diagram or some kind of way for you to visually put these different zones together when it comes to the 5 themes: economics, politics, social changes or distinctions, interactions with the environment, and culture. Start putting all those into a chart. That'll be the easiest way for you to understand this foundational period. And although we had a major discussion with Egypt and Mesopotamia, this one's a lot shorter, so you should be able to now catch your breath a little bit before you move on to China and Mesoamerica.